Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Essential Australia. This is the fourth session. And the cool thing about the fourth session is there's no PowerPoint. This is awesome. We're just going to talk about wine the way you're supposed to talk about wine, with wine in front of you. This is awesome. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Ron. Great to be here. I've been anticipating this, and sorry for the last minute cancellation on a couple of weeks ago. But I've certainly been looking forward to this one since we planned it. So.
Yes, the beauty of the anticipation is it makes it all the sweeter. Plus, the wines had been shipped, so it gave them a couple more weeks to settle down.
There you go. Great. That's why I planned it that way.
Yeah, of course. Yes. And the emergency came at just the right time. It was It's all good. We have to take care of important things, and wine can come afterwards. So we have a lovely group of our devotees from Winebow here with us. I'm going to mention to all of you, if you wouldn't mind, I won't have the capacity to manage the chat window and the Q&A and everything else. So if you have questions or comments even, and they're not questions, put them in the Q&A and I'll notice them, and then Mark and I can address them. We have this just basic plan. We're going to start with Yalumba Barossa Shiraz from the Samuels collection, and we're going to progress our way across the Australian continent from various climates and soil changes and winemaking philosophies. I think one of the things that Mark and I were most excited about this tasting is how wonderfully diverse these 6 wines show Shiraz, so-called, to be from the Australian continent, which is why we don't talk about Australian wine. We talk about Barossa wine. We talk about McLarenville wine. We're going to talk about Yarra Valley wine, and we're going to talk about Canberra wine today. So, among other things. So here we go. You ready, Mark?
I'm ready.
You have your glass poured?
I do. I've got the first 3. I'm doing it in batches of 3, but I've got 3 poured.
Yes, I'm doing one wine at a time because I have a small space to work with. So have at it. What are your impressions? What do we want to know about Yalumba? We know this 170-year history, so let's talk about winemaking stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say just a quick thing about Shiraz, and forgive me for people that have heard this already, but I see some, looking at the attendee list, I see some names on there that aren't. But I think one of the biggest problems we've got in discussing Australian wine generally, but specifically this variety, is, and I often use it on the slide, and you've probably seen it, you've attended any of my sessions, where I put, French Pinot, American Cabernet, and Australian Shiraz, and what's wrong with this picture. And what's wrong with the picture is only one of those statements is part of the modern wine vernacular. So I've got something buzzing in the background. I'll get rid of it in a minute. And that to me is a problem. Is like, we don't say I love American Cab and pass me a glass of French Pinot. We say Australian Shiraz all the time. And I think the lovely thing is, and I was just commenting to you, Ron, earlier about, wow, I'm trying to think of a portfolio that has a snapshot of regional diversity and qualities and price points the way you do with this particular variety in Australia, and I can't even think of one. So I think you guys are really lucky. I'm not just saying that because we're doing a presentation for you guys, but it's like, wow, if I wanted to pick 6 wines to show people a snapshot of that regional diversity, they would be top of my list. And so I think it's great. But then back to it, I think what's cool about this lineup too is that we're going to essentially not quite an entry-level wine with the Yalumba, but what it is a representative example of the flavor of Barossa, which is exactly what that wine is supposed to be. It's from multiple vineyard sources, and this is supposed to be, hey, this is that flavor of Barossa. And I think that's a region that's incredibly comforting to people in the US. People know the Barossa, they know Shiraz, and that's probably the major connecting point for most American drinkers about Australian wine. Barossa Shiraz, absolutely know it, love it. I would argue you don't know it the way you think you do, because I think things have changed. I think things have changed quite dramatically in the last sort of 10 years even. I think this wine was a different wine 10 years ago. And it goes back to that point I've made about what's going on in Australia across the board, warm climate, cool climate, whatever, it's freshness. And I see that in this wine, and there's a bit of vintage thing going on here. But Yalumba's a particularly impressive place to visit. I know some of the team members have been, and if you haven't, it's a cool place to go to, because they technically sit basically right on the cusp of where Eden Valley is in Angaston there. So right up from them is going into Eden Valley. But it's just such a great place to go and visit. There's very few places in Australia where they have their own cooperage. Very few places in the world that have their own cooperage, but the Yalumba's one of them. And there's just such a wonderful sort of history and heritage there, looking at the library, the museum wines, and just the general look and feel of the place is awesome. And how cool is it to think they are I think by a week, they are the oldest family-run wine business in Australia. I think the Bleasdale property, or the Potts family at Bleasdale, right, has about a week closer. But anyway, as I tasted through this, and I've done it a couple of times already, this not morning anymore, I can't call it morning. That freshness thing is on display. But I think what I've always loved about Barossa is there is a comfort in that style. There's richness. It's a warm climate. You can't get away from the fact this is a warm climate. But as I've said a million times, just because you've got warm climate doesn't exclude your wines from having precision and balance and brightness and freshness. And that's what I see in this wine in particular. They've got multiple vineyard sources. The appellation says Barossa, meaning they're probably sourcing, I don't have the tech sheet in front of me, they're probably sourcing fruit a little bit from some of these higher elevated vineyards, potentially up in Eden Valley. And that's a way of approaching it, picking a bit earlier, just that lovely sort of, you know, oak as a background noise nowadays, as opposed to the dominant piece of the orchestra. And I think that's a really, really encouraging thing. And I think there's very few people you could, even with the changed style, which I think is a fresher, livelier style, you're not going to get people going, oh, I don't like this, it's too light or anything. No, there's still richness, there's body, there's lovely warmth and generosity that you get from Barossa. And I still think it's in the glass in spades.
Yeah, a little bit about the tech as we then put some flavor descriptors out there for them. Yes, this must go up into Eden Valley for sourcing because the range of vineyards is 400 to 1,500 or 300 to 1,500 feet. So that's definitely Eden Valley. And then just as a note, I mean, this is a 14% alcohol wine out of Barossa, not your 15.5, not your 14.9, right? And that we've come across in the past. We've got a pH of 3.6, which isn't exactly low, but a total acidity of 6.1 grams. So there's a lot of natural goodness going on before fermentation ever happens to keep this wine in very classically Yalumba style, which is conservative, balanced, elegant.
Yeah, and I love it. I think it's, I've got my thing back here. I didn't want to be slurping and slobbering as I'm tasting my wine. But yeah, and I think this is quintessential sort of modern. It's a little bit of a foot in old school, but it's still, I would argue, this is still a great example of that approachable modern style of Barossa, Barossa Shiraz. And yeah, I think what price point wise, are you low 20s for this wine, are we?
I didn't look it up.
Yeah. Not expensive wine, and a very difficult wine for anyone to go, oh yeah, I don't like that. It's right. It's got all the things. It's got all the things that tick the boxes, but with just a bit more liveliness. And I think that modernness, and I'm really pleased at the evolution of it. It's happening in Australia generally, but in Barossa in particular, because I do think that Barossa did get tarred with a brush, which sort of was like, oh, all the wines are big, they're heavy, they're whatever. But that's not the case anymore. And I think anyone that's thinking that is not paying attention. And I think oak use, picking a bit earlier, doing the things like getting fruit from, in a wine like this, getting fruit from more elevated vineyards for that liveliness and freshness. Plus, we're looking at a vintage that was kind of weird and cold start, but ended up being sort of long and quite sort of drawn out. So they've got lovely flavor development without any sort of losing any of that structural complexity that I think is really, really important.
And just so, I mean, they don't see the bottles. We're talking about 18 vintage, right?
Yeah, 17. I've got 17. I don't know.
I've got 18. That's awesome.
There you go.
We can compare notes. So
I got the 17.
We're at 18. There's some ideas of conversation pieces, but if you don't have the wine in front of you, I find that there's definitively, the thing that makes it feel a little old school is that they're still using American oak, which comes through in that cedar and undertone of coconut. But the big difference between old school and now is that used to be a major, like you could pick that up almost like classic Rioja, and now it's a thread. It's not like a American oak. It's just a little bit. And, sort of a black cherry, black raspberry, black plum kind of driven wine with some blueberries on the side. And when you smell it, it smells like they're going to be really conserved, or even jammy. But then when you taste it, they're back to fresh and with a little thread underneath of conserved fruit, which I think is the major change for me as a taster of Australian wine across the board for Shiraz, is that there's that move across the board. And even in the warm climates, they figured out how to make the wine taste balanced and fresh and avoid that syrupy thing that turned me off of Barossa Shiraz for about a decade. And it's flipped. It's not like that. Even when you're there and you taste other properties besides Yalumba, it's just not that way anymore. It's great.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important point, because I do think that there was a period of time where it wasn't, Barossa Shiraz was not the first thing I was leaning for, and yet there's times where I would, but generally speaking, the profile was bigger, it was richer, and maybe, yeah, I don't know if clunky is the right word, but I do think that existed, and I don't think it has been like that for a long time, and I think that it's a really lovely evolution. And I think in a snapshot here, if obviously this is a wine that people are, the sales team are going to be taking out on a much more frequent basis than some of the other wines. And that is an absolute beautiful snapshot of modern Barossa. And I like that. To my mind, the thing that's always, there is that generosity of fruit. There's that sort of the warmth and the spice. But to me, there's a Barossa-ness that exists. And if we had a Grenache in front of us, or a Mourvedre or a blend, there's this warm, spicy, earthy quality that comes through in the finish that, to my mind, defines what good Barossa is. And that's just a barbecue, grilled meat kind of wine. Away you go. Just pulled pork sandwich is what I want when I look at that right now. I should have had lunch. I didn't.
I guess, yeah. You should have had lunch before we started, because you'll be really hungry after tasting all these wines. Okay, so it definitely has that black peppery Shiraz thing, but there's also that Barossa spicy. There's a dusty, earthy note to this wine too. At least there was here for me in the house. So let's move on. Yeah, we want to move to McLaren.
Yeah, sure.
We don't want to take too terribly long. Don't make people overly jealous that we're tasting wine and they're listening. So we're moving to Wira Wira, the Catapult Shiraz, and this one is fascinating. I mean, Gregory Trott is a fascinating character on his own. I would have liked to have met the man based on the descriptions, but I have not. And so this is named after his lifelong dream to actually have a trebuchet, a catapult at the winery, and he does have that. And I had the privilege of actually pulling the pin and letting the watermelon fly 300 yards across the way. It's pretty cool. So this is the Catapult Shiraz, so named, all McLaren Vale, and away we go.
Yeah, it is one of those things. I remember taking my first group that I took to where I saw that on the schedule. It's like, oh, we're going to be firing the trebuchet, and I'm like, oh, come on, guys, we've got better things to do. Yet you do it,
no,
and
you don't.
One of the most satisfying things to do as an adult, I must say. I was like, wow, this is the thud of a melon that's been flung 300 yards is ridiculously satisfying. There's not a thing bigger than this at the end of it. Like, yeah, boy, bring out the kid in me or what? But it was fun. But great spirit. It speaks a lot to the spirit, because they're very serious about what they do with their wines, but they're also very serious about having fun at Wira Wira, and I think that's one of the charms. And I've always felt like, as a great example, I've always loved this Catapult Shiraz, aside from the story, is that you want just to get a beautiful idea of what sort of classic textbook McLaren Vale is at, very reasonable price. This is the deal. This is the deal right here. Mm-hmm. And I think we always talk about I think there's a lot more similarities between Barossa and McLaren Vale rather than differences, but there are differences. I think the structure of tannins and acid are a little bit different in McLaren Vale. I think you see it here, and you definitely see a more accented blueberry fruit. They always talk about that, and it's here. It's not just parasuggestion. I get it here in spades, but I also get a bit of that warm, spicy sort of finish to it that I find in Barossa, frankly, for that matter. But there's
and the similarity between these two wines is the idea of mixing the oak usage, which is very, very common in Barossa, very common in McLaren Vale, as producers have tried to move away from this idea that you identify our wines because we over oaked them. Okay, that was a reality for a while. This is hogsheads and puncheons, which is the common. You start reading tech sheets across both of these regions, and they keep saying hogsheads and puncheons. It's not really small barrels anymore, even if they're French or American, doesn't matter. They're smaller, and there's a lot of used oak going on. This one is that way. So this does have 1% Viognier, just by the way, at least the one I have, because I have 2016. But again, and so what we're going for here on this is now we're moved to 14.5% alcohol, which is expected for McLaren Vale. Still 3.5 pH though, so that's pretty well balanced on its own. And this one again has 6 grams per liter total acidity. So what does that tell you before you even taste this wine? If you read the text sheet, by the way, it's a lot of fun out there. Chris and Cliff and David and everybody else that's on the call to do text sheet blind tasting. Like give somebody the grape and the technical data and ask them, what do you think it tastes like? And, with a certain amount of experience, you can get pretty close. So this wine is going to show you that tart side, but it's going to smell really ripe. And that's kind of the way it goes. You want to give them some flavor while I taste them?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you do. The acidity and the structure of the tannins, to my mind, is always, it's almost like it is the way that acid and tannin work off one another in McLaren Vale, in particular this one. I've got the 18, so I've got a different wine from you, but I think the reality is that sort of tartar sort of acidity and that sort of slightly more grippy tannin, but not in an unpleasant way, just it gives it that sort of a bit of vibrancy and a bit of lift in the end. But I think the blueberry qualities there, that sort of, there's blackberry and other sort of dark fruits as well. But I think that vein of blueberry that runs through this, I think, is really cool. But very fun.
This is one of those red wines I call crunchy, because it is very much like biting into a fresh berry, where you expect it to be really lush, and blackberry looks like it's going to be so sweet and unctuous, and you bite into it and it's tart and crunchy.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, that whole oak discussion. I think that's the thing. When you look at tech sheets, you start thinking about the oak, but without the tech sheets, you're probably not even thinking about the oak. When I look at these two wines, like, okay, I see it there, but it would have you're absolutely right. It would have been a discussion point in the past, but it's just not. It's no longer part of the picture. It's like, right. Oh, it's background noise. We know it's there, but it isn't the thing that's defining the wine or forming any of the major flavor profile, which is so refreshing, because we don't, we're in the wine business, not the oak business.
Yeah, I'd like to see that in more regions than just McLaren Vale and Barossa, like outside of Australia, to pick up this trend. But I really like how this wine shows Shiraz. It's the fruit profile is right. It's got the black pepper. It's got a little herbal thing going on in there.
A little bit, yeah.
It's really hard to define. You can't really call it rosemary, and it's not eucalyptus or anything, but there's an herbal twinge, like dried herbs of some sort going on.
Yeah.
And it has that texture. This is one of those wines that at a very affordable price, you can stand up to braised short ribs. I mean, this can be a wine by the glass program in restaurants, that sort of thing. This is a very, that's what it's supposed to taste like kind of wine.
Yeah. Yeah. Dried herbs, I think, is good, because there is a herbal kind of component to this, but it's not that green herbal note. It's a dried, like almost sage or bay leaf or something. No,
I think we're going to find some green herb around here a little later in the tasting, but not yet. So in summary, if we're talking about these two, why did we start with Barossa and McLaren Vale? We have a really amazing lineup. The next place we're going is most of the way across the continent to Great Southern. So why are we starting here?
I thought that these are the two wines. Number one, these are the two wines that would be going out most frequently for the guys to be sort of selling. And I think talking about the evolution of the style is important, but it's also the two areas, or what I could argue, certainly Barossa being the region that people know the best. And I think, if you're going to start with a tasting like this, you can certainly, we could have justified starting with a lighter wine. The Mayo wine's probably the lightest of the lot, but I don't think that's the way to go, because I don't think that's the right narrative. Right here, you're looking at the two classic regions that are the most well distributed. There's more Barossa Shiraz in the US than anything else, any other Shiraz. McLaren Vale would be a close second. And so these are the two benchmark regions. They've got the history, they've got the reputation, they've got the sort of stylistic sort of interpretations. And I think I think it's a great place to start, but it's also an important place to start, because I've done so much stuff over the last, even when we did get out in front of people and you'd be tasting the wines with reps at some of the bigger distributors. Now, the amount of people that hadn't tried the wines in the last little while was quite surprising. And the surprise about the style shift was surprising too. I know that's not the case at Winebow. You guys are mostly getting an opportunity to try, although under COVID stresses, I'm not 100% sure. But the reality is, you need to get out and try these wines and be confident about selling them, because once you've tried them, you go, oh wow, that's not maybe not quite what I was thinking. There's a new dimension that I think is helpful. So I think they're just two good styles to start with, where there's the comfort, it's evolved and it's changed, but there's comfort in those two wines. I think that's like, we know where we are with these two. This is cool. Yeah,
I also think these are two great wines to start in the world of, I have a limited sample budget. I only have certain people to play with. I have to be careful what I choose. These are wines that I would want to put in my sample bag when I have an opportunity to see the buyers who are willing to taste wines blind.
Yeah.
They know you're not trying to trick them. They're just you're just trying to show them something that might have prejudice against or for, without the prejudice for or against. And I really think these are strong contenders for that, because then you can say to them price point and region, And I think they're actually going to be really excited about these wines as opposed to what they might say in a predisposed thought of, hey, you want to try some Barossa or some McLaren Bell Shiraz.
Right.
Some buyers are still into that, and that's great. But, if we're fighting uphill a little bit, then let's do it blind whenever we can, because these wines will change people's minds.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, the thing that we are battling in the US market is that for the most part, obviously it depends on your market segment, what have you, but people are buying American wines. It's still 3 out of every 4 bottles. People are buying American wines. And at that price point, they're buying California. They're probably buying broad appellation California. Mm-hmm. But for a similar drinking experience, and I would argue slightly different, but there's a richness, there's a warmth, there's a comfort in those. There's no reason why a buyer or, aside from the fact that they may be wanting a California wine specifically, there's the stylistically, though, this is an easy transition, especially with the Yalumba. A little bit more serious with the Catapult, a little bit more sort of, structured and what have you. But the Yalumba wine, it's like just drop dead delicious, and not much to dislike about it.
No, not much. So let's take a trip. Let's hop in a plane. We're going to fly 2,000 miles ish from from Adelaide. It's probably
a little bit less, but 2,000 kilometers.
2,000 kilometers because we got to go to Perth. Or can we fly into Great Southern?
You can fly into, there's a sort of regional airport in Albany. They call it Albany is how I want to say it, but they call it Albany there. And I've done that actually. I've flown down with a group. I've only done it once. It was only the one time I've been down there. And you fly into Perth and just kind of hang around for a bit, and then you jump on a small little puddle jumper down to Albany. You can drive it. It's probably about a 5-hour drive. Quite a spectacular area to be in. It's Great Southern itself is the appellation that gets used the most, but the reality is that it's made up of 5 little sub-regions, which 2 of the main sources of fruit are in there, Franklin River and Pahrump. There's a bit of Pahrump, but Franklin River and Mount Barker. Mount Barker being a good center for Shiraz. And Cabernet for that matter, but I think there's mostly Franklin River in this particular wine.
Franklin and Pahrump group,
yeah. But it's a stunningly beautiful place. I was completely charmed because, if Perth is the most remote major city anywhere on the planet, then you drive down to Margaret River, which you guys have, a brilliant Margaret River property, as to, Howard Park being one of them and Vas Felix being the other. But the reality is that if that's considered remote, get down to Great Southern is even further, and a lot of distance between properties and traveling around, but absolutely stunning scenery, and just you get that sense in the air as well, because the predominant breezes from the south here are, it's Southern Ocean. Its next stop is Antarctica, and that's that air-conditioned feel that you get from the ocean there is prevalent all the time. Even on a hot summer day, you feel the breeze, you feel the change, you feel the water temperature shifting, even as far inland as Franklin River. And I love this as this was a wine, not this vintage. I've got the 17. I think it might have been the 16. It was like whenever I did.
We both have the 17 on this one, which is great.
Yeah, which is awesome. It was, again, a bit of a challenging vintage that turned out to be brilliant in the end. But what I loved about this, I was at blind tasting in this particular wine. It was I believe it was a different vintage. I think it was a 16 vintage. That's at Texom International Wine Awards. And I was doing the Aussie panel. Obviously, the wines were all blind. And 2 other, MW and a Master, we're all like, what the heck is this? This is brilliant. This is this kind of like, it's not cool climate, but it's not warm climate. It's this lovely sort of thing that straddles both fences. And I think it's a great transition wine, which is kind of why I wanted this one to be wine number 3, because what you're getting in here is that sort of weight and body of a sort of a medium weight kind of quality, and that red fruited savory thing that I think sort of harkens a bit more towards cool climate. Although I don't see this as a straight textbook sort of cool climate wine. I think next wine does show that. Yeah. But for Syrah, I think Shiraz, this is showing that sort of moderate sort of, framework. And I love it. I think it's delicious. I quite like the 17 too. It's showing beautifully.
I had a 15 a couple weeks ago. I just ordered a bottle and it showed up as a 15, which was like, yeehaw, which was really showing the meat and the pepper through development. This one has it. What I find interesting about this wine is when you taste it, it starts off with the warm climate face first, right? And
I just got that right now.
Blackberries and black plum, and it's moving towards, oh, that's a little bit like what I just tasted it out of Wira Wira, right? And then all of a sudden, zing, it goes completely backwards the other direction, and it's raspberry and black raspberry, and then the herbs, you know. So this wine definitely shows those green herbs. There's a little bit of distant rosemary, mint combination, and then it has the pepper. And so, you know, what else do you want out of Shiraz? I mean, that's like the whole face of the grape, right?
Yeah, and I think that's so great, because as I was tasting this again, I tried it a little bit earlier, but I was tasting it. It's because it is a slightly deceptive wine. It's got the mouth-filling richness of like, oh wow, there you go. But it completely, like you say, it does a complete flip on the structure and the flavor profile. I think is very different than I think the first impression on the palate actually suggests. But lovely stuff, and it's also I've seen a change with. I can't think when Janice started or took over, but I think this is her work here in 17. I can't remember when she was been in there, but I do see there's a slightly more deft touch with the wines from Howard Park more recently. I think you were seeing the hand of the winemaker, but beautiful stuff. And I think it's a shame there aren't more. It's cool that you guys have this, but it's one of those tough things. We used to trade to Great Southern, but then in the end, the region that would sort of bring you down there and says, well, we just have no wines on export in the US. So it ends up being one of those regions that gets not forgotten as much as just not more infrequently visited, which is a shame, because there's some bloody brilliant stuff in the region in general. And I think Howard Park is one of those, because they've got Howard Park, obviously you guys know they've got property in Margaret River as well, but they've got some beautiful stuff that they're crafting in Great Southern. I think really representative of how those varieties that they're working with down there should express themselves in what is a sort of a strange region, in the sense that it's always being cooled by that sort of Southern Ocean thing, but there's definitely still getting that warmth and ripeness at the same time. So yeah, very cool. And
you know, this wine does see the changing, like just discussing culture here, right? The name of the wine again. Oh, thank you, Betty. Appreciate that. We're talking too fast. Howard Park, and this is specifically, there we go, Flint Rock Shiraz. And I've had from the 15 forward, they're all delicious. And there is a tasting note on Winebow YouTube channel of this vintage in video form under the Tasty Expectations already, because I had a bottle at home and decided to go ahead and record one. So that is Flint Rock Shiraz. Thanks for making sure we were paying attention, Betty. We really appreciate that, because that would be a shame to not know what wine we're talking about.
Exactly, yeah.
And just staying on this trend of like, all right, oak usage, because I think it's the reason I want to keep bringing this up is I think it's a cultural reflection, a winemaking culture philosophy change sort of thing, right? So this one has 20% new and 80% used. They don't specify. Well, and it's a mix of barrique and 300 liter, which would be 300 liters for hogsheads, right?
Hogsheads, yeah.
Yeah. So again, interestingly enough, you have them playing with both here too. I think this is sort of a universal adjustment that's happening.
Across the board.
And again, I think both of us would agree that oak is makeup on this wine. It's like window dressing. It's not really the substance of the wine like it has been in so many others in the past. Anything else you want to bring up about Howard Park at this point?
No, but I think your comments on oak are great in the sense that, I mean, that recognition of oak as a maturation vessel as opposed to primarily being a flavor imparter, which maybe it's a harsh way to sort of approach it, but that's kind of how things were going. It's like one of the main things is you get that big toasty sort of oak quality that all the fruit still absorbs it. And I'm not convinced in the past it did absorb it the way people thought. But the reality is that it's being used for what it is. It's that sort of slightly carefully controlled oxidative environment that the barrel gives you, but also a little bit of background noise. And that background noise is really, really appealing. And and I think that's in terms of just a shift or overall in Australian winemaking philosophy. I think it's a major one with red wine production as well. We're going to start talking about whole cluster, which I believe there's a little bit in this one. There's about, there's 15% whole cluster in this one, a whole bunch in this one. And the reality is that I think that's part of the picture about that sort of bringing slightly different flavor profiles, freshness, and different sort of structural complexities along with that sort of backing off of the oak. And I think that's lovely stuff indeed.
One of the interesting things that as I keep coming back to that wine, every time I come back to it, the first thing I smell is pepper and herbs. not
Right.
fruit, not oak. I smell Syrah, pepper and herbs, and it's delightful.
Yeah, and when they did that whole business in Clonakilla has a fair bit of it too. I don't know about this particular wine, but they did that whole business where the AWR identified Rotundone as that black pepper component, and they did that identification, and it's all from vineyard sites that are typically a bit cooler than normal. That's where Rotundone really jumps out. That's where you get that pepperiness coming through, and you see it in this one. Even though, like you said, there's a bit of warmth up front with this one, but yeah, I think lovely stuff, and it's I think a wonderful transition wine for people. If people say I don't like Australian Shiraz, it's like, well, first of all, no such thing as Australian Shiraz, but second of all, here, try this, have a look at this. But I think again, it's like anything, you've got to get wines in glasses. It's been my sort of focus for the last 10 years working for Wine Australia. Just once you get the wines in the glasses in front of people, then your discussions can happen. And obviously, we are challenged with that in this current environment, but it's going to change. Things are, I think, slowly things are coming back to whatever normal is going to look like.
And so now we move to the wine that's perfect for the jaded individual who refuses to ever taste Australia again, because they were lumping the entire continent into a 20-year-old idea, and they only want cool climate, everything. And yeah, they exist. Now we're at Timo Meyer, Yarra Valley Syrah. So Yarra Valley is in Victoria, for those of you listening. And it is a valley that opens into access to the ocean. They're north, and it sort of comes above Geelong Peninsula and then opens up. So the oceanic influence varies depending on where you are in the valley. So as you are closer to the coast, sort of think Carneros, and then we move into more like around lower Sonoma, and then we get further into Sonoma, we have less and less influence, but we still have some. And so but the advantage in Yarra is as you go away from the ocean, you're going up in elevation. So you may lose your maritime, but you're gaining coolness from elevation. And Timo Meyer is in a fairly elevated place. And he does 100% whole bunch. And, he's crazy, basically, is what it boils down to. And don't we love those kind of winemakers?
Timo is he is a unique specimen, that's for sure. First time I met him, there's certain people in the forget just Australians, but I mean, he's a German background originally, but he's just one of those characters you meet, and it's difficult not to like him because he is absolute no bullshit. Like, he will tell you how it is, and even if that means you got to stand over there for 10 yards, he'll let you know exactly how it is. But he's, he comes across with this whole, I'm just a farmer. But his attention to detail is absolutely there. But it's like this stuff's quietly making itself in the corner, but that's not him at all. And he's got some lovely lines. He loves, I wish I could do his accent, because there's this kind of twang of Australia, but with some very strong German undertones. So it's kind of, oh, Mark, I love the bunchy shit. That's his kind of standard line, because he's got a whole bunch, 100% whole bunch Cabernet. I'm sure they exist in other parts of the world, but I've never had 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, 100% whole bunch. That's the first one I've ever tried. But like I said, I'm sure there's one out there. But he does it really well, and I think that bunchy character, because his whole thing too is that he likes funkiness in his wines, but he doesn't want any problematic sort of things in there. But he wants a bit of funk. He wants a little bit of sort of points of difference, and I think this wine supplies it. And I love putting this in front of people, because we did this at this particular one. It might have been this vintage, I think, but we did it in a Shiraz lineup at Decanted. His and Taras Akota's wine, where they're kind of like, okay, these are the outliers here, but this shows you, and there was Hill of Grace in there, there was Grange in there, was Clonakilla, all the top wines, plus this sort of outlier stuff that, paints that sort of light and shade of what the variety's capable of. And you put this in the glass and you just smell it and taste it now. It's like, to me, it's like, we just talked about Amaro before this started, but man, I think that's what you're getting in that, from that bunchy quality, that whole bunch character. You get sort of partial carbonic going on there, so you get some lovely sort of, vibrant fruit quality, but that structure and complexity and that sort of herbal quality that comes through, that is borderline Campari, borderline Amaro. I love it. It's not for everyone. I understand that it's not necessarily for everyone, but what did you think? Do you like that character in the wine?
I think it's great. If only for the point of difference, but before I give you my tasting notes, folks, let's listen to this. And if I gave you this text sheet, what continent would you put me on, first of all? Right? Syrah, 13.1% alcohol, 3.53 pH, 5.9 total acidity. That's not a Syrah note. That's Pinot Noir from Burgundy note on a cool vintage. So,
Right.
it's like, all right, wow, that's unusual. And then the whole bunch thing, definitely. So the one thing that you mentioned right there that really, I was glad you mentioned it because it opened the light bulb in my head, is the partial, the little bit of carbonic that's going to happen when you do a whole bunch shows up in this wine in this really pretty, unusually pure raspberry sort of note, like almost
Yeah.
raspberry coulis, instead of
Dark raspberry, Chambord liqueur.
yeah,
That's what I get in that. It's like a dark raspberry kind of quality without the liqueur syrupiness, but it's yeah, it's lovely stuff. And these are the kind of wines that just, yeah, sort of remind you as to why you got into the business in the first place. Characters like him, wines like this. And the thing is that this is, and because we talked about Yarra in the sessions, and the reality is that it's become this sort of benchmark region for Pinot, and rightly so. But there's bloody good Chardonnay there. The history lies with Cabernet-based wines,
yep,
even though that's a piece of the picture. But what's really coming out on the fringes now, or less even on the fringes, everyone's making, is this style of Shiraz, but labeled mostly Syrah, which I'm in two minds about. There's a little part of me that thinks it may be confusing to people, but I don't lose sleep over it necessarily. But the reality is, though, that style, the amount I've done this with Luke Lambert, his wine's a little harder to find because he's tiny. He's only got a small amount of Syrah at the top of the hill in his site there, in what's technically the Upper Yarra. But in terms of, a style that people go, what the heck is going on here? And that's, I think, in a nutshell, and we're not even through all the wines here, is that this has been my contention for years, is that I love this variety. I always have done. Yes, it can be clunky. Yes, it can be awkward, but it is a variety that actually spans some climate sort of ranges better than most people are aware of. And I love that Pinot comparison because I think there's a correspondence as to where you can grow a good Pinot and where you can grow a good Syrah, as Syrah right on the edge. Down in Oregon, I remember the guy from Christum planted Syrah, first estate bottled Syrah in Willamette. Everyone thought he was an idiot. Now everyone's growing Syrah down there because of that slight shift in temperature. And I think there's this, they use the way they're playing with it with wines like this, and the way it's got Pinot-esque sort of approach to it, even though I don't think the flavor profile and the structure is like Pinot, but there's something about that. And where else on the planet can you, within one country or one region, without a doubt, that's not possible in one region, but there's no country on the planet that can do with this variety what we can when we can show it. And then you get to show it in 6 glass. If we had 12 or 14 or something even better, but the reality is that we don't. There's no one can do that. And got this on one hand, we've tried the Yalumba, and we're about to hit a couple of arguably the greatest examples on the planet of this variety. So
Timo's hitting that Northern Rhone Syrah range, Côte-Rôtie, not Hermitage, Saint-Joseph perhaps. And
or just
delightful.
Maybe
and that herbal Amari sort of thing that finishes off this wine. Such a beautiful thing, because it's an interesting, really fruit forward beginning, and then it has this beautiful cut that's a cross between the tannin of the grapes, the tannin of the stems from the clusters, and then that Amari bitter herb. You called it Campari. I don't even know what to call it, but I'll go with Campari, and it just cuts it away. At least.
And also important to sort of remember too is that when people say they don't like that whole bunch quality, whether it be Pinot, it's a big discussion nowadays, more so now in Australia with Syrah and Shiraz being in there. But I'm always quick to point out though that in general, I love that thing. And people say, oh, it's a bit too dominant in the wine. It's a bit too much of the winemaker kind of thing. But then if I think about all the traditionally historic wines that have always had a lot of whole bunch, they're for the long haul. They're definitely about something. I mean, Domaine La Romani Conti, not that we should be making a comparison. Those wines are like whole bunch, and they always have been. But the reality is that they're not for today or tomorrow. They're for sort of a bit down the road. But anyway, that's, but I think that beautiful fruit that you talk about is why this is completely nutty delicious right now. And I can't separate myself from the guy either. I know what he's doing. I've been up there. I've met with him. I know what he's doing. I'm like, okay, there's a bit of Timo in that wine, a lot of Timo in that one.
And by the way, a little quote on winemaking methodology. It's racked one time for bottling, no filtering, no filtration. So this is a very, very, by tech sheet, hands off. Obviously, somebody's monitoring, somebody's keeping track of things because the wine is very clean. I appreciate that he said I like funky, but there's no what I call funky in that wine. There's difference, there's intrigue, but I wouldn't call it funky.
That's what he's looking for.
Say we move to Canberra.
Oh man, I didn't know what to say about this wine. It was an earth-shattering wine for me, having been moved away from Australia for a while. Wasn't working with Australian wine. I was just sommelier in Canada, and doing my stuff, and came across this and went, "What the hell?" We're reading about it, then tasting it, and I hope you opened it early as I did, because the perfume on this wine is ridiculous. It's always, and I think, and yeah, look, he's you guys know the story. We've been through it enough, but the point is that he took his he wanted to get back into the family business, decided to get back into family business, did a trip in the 90s to Côte Rôtie, and just thought, wow, we can do this. We can do this. This is going to work with our fruit. This is going to work with our style. And he took it to a different level it's become the benchmark for that style. People try to copycat, and there was a plethora of like Shiraz Viogniers all over the place, and they became boring and sort of pedestrian. But the reality is he stuck to his guns here, and talk about attention to detail. But there's also just a structure of fruit. It's hard to call Canberra District cool climate, because I'm not sure that you'd feel that but there's a continentality there that's going on climate wise. It's inland. You get those cool nights and warmer days. So it's really hard to say that it's cool climate, but you definitely, when you taste the wine, this is not a warm climate wine. It's not necessarily cool climate in the same way that Timo's wine is, but it's, man, has it got perfume and does that dance that I think is incredibly charming in any wine that's capable of it. And I think Côte Rôtie does it, and this does it, which is that power and intensity and elegance and refinement and perfume at the same time. You think, oh, that, sign me up. How the hell do you manage that? It's just so good.
Yeah, this wine, just for everybody listening, if we can put this into words, when you stick your nose in the glass of this wine does not first give you fruit. It gives you the things I want to find. By the way, David, we're dealing with Clonakilla.
All right, I'll put it up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you don't have a background. It's easier. Clonakilla, Shiraz Viognier 2018. Clonakilla is the benchmark producer from Canberra, and honestly, the benchmark producer for the idea of Shiraz Viognier, which is what we were trying to get to in that last conversation. And just let's play tech sheet bingo for a second. You've got Barrique and Puncheon. Used and new, mostly used, as you can tell by the flavor. It's 6% Viognier, 94% Shiraz. And okay, so here's the tech sheet. What kind of wine am I imagining? 14% ABV, 3.68 pH, residual sugar not an issue, and acidity of 6.1 TA. So we see some of our other wines, like that last wine was only 5 point something TA, but it still felt tart, right? So there's always this dance between alcohol, pH, and total acidity, because pH is driven by the kind of acidity. In other words, if you have one of the harder acids, the pH goes down a lot more, like malic, right? So what you have in this wine is this beautiful balance of, it feels tart and rich at the same time. It feels ripe and fresh at the same time. And more than anything else for me, what really excites me about Syrah as a grape is when it shows the other side, right? The rotondon, the herbal. If you can balance that out with the fruit, then I just start smiling and going, oh, that smells so good. I'm all in. That's Clonakilla's mark, is they're going to have the herbs, they're going to have the black pepper, they're going to have a smell that most people would associate with old world Syrah, not New South Wales. So, and this wine shows it all.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. This and the next wine, honestly, I would argue vociferously for these being some of the best expressions of this variety anywhere on the planet, never mind just Australia. I think Clonakilla is an absolute benchmark. And it's such a departure. And when you get to try them side by side, I feel quite privileged to be able to do this. And I have been lucky enough to do it on a few occasions. It's ludicrous. And the wines age beautifully. I think that perfume it's almost the perfume to my mind hasn't even come through just yet. And there are people that would suggest that 6% Viognier is too much, because they always say, 1 or 2% is enough. It can come across as too dominant, but it's not dominant. He seems to manage it in a really interesting way. And I think the perfume that you do get isn't necessarily always about the Viognier. That is about cool climate grown Shiraz or Syrah, call it what you want. And I think that is that violet-y sort of perfumed quality is part of it, and beautifully done. And again, you meet the person, and he's an incredibly religious man and very devout and very polite in his approach, but the passion is just completely and utterly, bristling out of the guy. He's awesome. He's awesome. And and I love, and I have to say on a personal note, I watched this wine in the US market not doing anything for a number of reasons, which will remain sort of, in the background. But I'm so thrilled that this is sold out because I'm so happy that it's sort of in the right hands right now, because you have the right people, because this, this is a world-class wine. It's one of the legends in Australia, and it should not be languishing somewhere in the distributor's warehouse. This is the sort of stuff that needs to get out in front of the right buyers, and they will snap it up straight away. And I think that's pretty much what happened. I mean, I think when we were asking about this, it was done. You can't really get any more. It's all been allocated and gone.
They told me I couldn't have a sample.
Yeah.
So I went to a different person. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's so nice. It's really good to see, because, and I know that Tim's really happy because he's a very loyal guy and he wanted to stick with who he was with, and he was originally with John Larcher in the early days, and then because I remember I visited him years ago saying, hey, where are your wines? You don't have any. He said, oh, hey, let me check. I have 189 cases sitting in a warehouse in California way back in the day. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That was back 10 years ago. But I can't talk enough about this, and I'm thrilled that and for those of you on the team that have had the chance to try it, it's great. And honestly, if there was ever a wine that you just fork out your own money for to go and buy and just try it, this would be one of them.
This is one of them. Absolutely. Yeah. I still remember tasting it the first time with John Larcher in the room in Michigan.
There you go.
A much younger man.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, what is that? And it lived up to it all the time. It's one of those wine experiences that you definitely have to have. And there's a couple of Australian producers that have that memory for me. One here and then one up in Clare Valley. All right. So shall we move to the legendary 100-year-old vineyard of Edelstone?
Right, this
is Hinchley, Mount Edelstone, 2015 from Eden Valley. So we've moved up off of the Barossa Valley floor into Eden Valley, which is an extension of Barossa Zone. And, elevation here is the key. You have a much different sort of environment when you get up there, and you have to sort of get there to feel it, but you can still see, in some places, you can still see Bay St. Vincent, but you feel like you changed seasons. We left Adelaide, short sleeves, and it was a little warm, and you're like, I don't think I need to take my jacket. And we got up to the top of Eden Valley, and then the jacket went on immediately because it was breezy and chilly. Edelstone was planted in 1912 by Ronald Angus, the direct descendant of the founder, Samuel Angus of South Australia. Samuel, right? Do I have that right?
George Fife Angus
George
was the original. Yeah.
And so what you have here is, 1,312 feet of elevation.
Yeah, it's, there's a couple, I don't know. I think this is such a unique expression of, arguably one of the most unique expressions of Shiraz. I think there's a correspondence to Hill of Grace. I'm lucky enough to have tried Hill of Grace a few times, but I've certainly had this a ton. Every vintage for the last God knows how long, and I don't get to drink it on a frequent basis, but I've certainly had enough of it. And there's a correspondence. It's slightly different, but such a unique expression of Shiraz period, but also just a wonderful expression of a particular single site. I think the interesting component for me is the texture is phenomenal. It's such, and that's I think that's what people talk about with old vines a little bit. There's a quality of tannin that's different. It's a different texture. It's power and intensity, but it's almost like the power and intensity of those tannins are wrapped up in this cloak of, I don't know, softness or something. It's really bizarre to sort of explain, but I think it's always a particular wine that has a very unique expression. I know that Stephen Henschke, when I asked him, what do you think is the expression of Eden Valley? And he was saying it through the lens of this and Hill of Grace, but black pepper, blackberry, sage, and bay leaf. And I'm like, boom, that is so spot on. I think there's a black currant note that runs through the core of this particular wine, which is an unusual descriptor for most people for Shiraz. But the reality is I think it exists, and it's incredibly unique, and it is like boom. And I mentioned to you earlier, there's been a couple of times in blind tastings where I've picked this wine out, not because I'm anything special, but because it's so singular and it's like expression. If you've had it enough, you go, okay, that's kind of like a gimme. It's so Henschke. And I would argue that this is one of the great expressions. Let's even forget Shiraz, one of the great single site expressions of wine anywhere on the planet. Because it's year in, year out, vagaries of vintage. There is a core to whatever this expression is in there that I think is absolutely magnificent. They also decided to bottle this as single vineyard wine in the 1950s, 52 or 54. I can't remember. I think it was 52. Not conventional wisdom.
No.
Not conventional wisdom at all. That's not what people were thinking. And that's what they did. And they thought, no, this wine was being blended into other wines, as was the trend back in those days, as it was in many places for that matter. I'm visiting Diamond Creek in California, and he decided to single vineyard bottlings. And it's like, well, no one was really doing that in those days. It's that sort of, call it visionary, call it just thoughtfulness. But that was the reality for this wine. And honestly, I can't, and this is not a cheap wine, but also for what this is in terms of history, heritage, single site, all the great markers that are there for expensive wine and what you pay for. The fact that this is the price it is a joke, because you can spend a lot more money on California Cab, not to make a comparison, a lot more money on California Cab and not get the same sort of, history, heritage. And then we were talking 7 generations right now at Henschke. And if there is such a thing as a king and queen in Australia for wine, it's Stephen and Prue Henschke. They are royalty. And but I mean, what is there? That's such a satisfying wine to drink. It's just ridiculous. I feel guilty.
Let's describe it a little bit for those of people out there who aren't tasting it with us. First of all, I want to point out that if you didn't notice in this, show the Enolocke. This wine is not under cork; it's under Enolocke, which I am so in favor of. I love that. They went to a lot of trouble in the winery to create an amazing wine, and this doesn't put it at risk. That's my opinion. We could have a discussion about corks. I have a big opinion on corks, and nobody in Portugal really likes it, so we'll just stop there. But the idea of, all right, again, going back to tech sheet, just to keep the conversation consistent, right? We're now in Eden Valley, which is part of Barossa Zone. We had a Barossa Zone wine earlier that had a little Eden in it. This is all Eden. So this is 14.5% alcohol, which kind of makes sense when you have 100-year-old vines. They're going to be concentrated, but it's 3.5 pH. This is the lowest pH wine we've tasted so far, including Timo's wine, which means it has 6.3 total acidity. So, wow, figure that out. We have unbelievable extract, huge, perfect ripeness, and at the same time, perfect acid structure to balance it all out. And I think that's part of the reason that the texture is so unbelievably satisfying, because it's velvet and crisp at the same time. It's black currant juice. I agree with you. I called it mulberry extract, but I think it's probably better to call it black currant. Yeah. And you get that amazing fresh fruit balance with this just ethereal texture that just
it's seductive. It's a very seductive texture.
Really seductive wine. And as this is one of those wines that's so beautiful to drink on its own, you have to think very carefully about what you put in front of it for food, which is not my normal thought process. I'm always thinking like, all right, what am I going to eat with this? What am I going to eat with this? This one I'm like, maybe just a simple piece of cheese.
Yeah, quite possible. We had some Australian Wagyu beef at the dinner that we did up in Tahoe, and we had the 2002 in Magnum of this, which was something special as well. Stephen brought it over and helped me decant and do all that sort of stuff with it. It was awesome. But like I said, there's royalty in wine, and well, maybe there's not really royalty in wine, but in my mind, this is Australian wine royalty right here. And it's not just about, I think sometimes, I'm funny when it comes to the great wines of the world. Anywhere I've been and tried, and you go, okay, is this wine as good as everyone says? And I've done that with this, and certainly with Hill of Grace, every time I've taken a group there. And on 3 occasions, people have cried in tasting, like, Hill of Grace with Stephen, talking about it, because you're drinking, it's like, that's damn near perfect. I'm not looking for anything else right now. Everything that people say about this, it's great. And you experience that with the great wines of the world, where you go, wow, it absolutely is as good as everyone says. And I think Henschke's in there with that. And yes, I don't think it's a cheap one. I think it's hovering around a couple $100 right now, but I would argue that that's cheap. For this, I would argue it's cheap. It's not, obviously we've got to be sensitive to sort of, the issues around COVID right now and people's spending habits. But the reality is that for what you're getting here, you got to be kidding me. It's a bargain almost, compared to other.
The wines at that price point coming out of California, you're not getting 100-year-old vines. The wines at that price point coming out of Bordeaux, you're getting brand heritage, but the vines are much younger than that. The wines coming out of that price point in Burgundy, you're getting location combined with winemaker prowess, right? It's all about reputation. So I agree with you. I think you take this and stack up what you're getting. Heritage, single family ownership for 6+ generations.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about more heritage, more validation than what you're getting out of many of the great wines of Bordeaux are now owned by somebody else, right?
Right.
Burgundy
family tradition's not there. Yeah.
Really hard to get 6 generations in one family in Burgundy, right?
They get split up. Yeah.
The economics don't work very often. And California, we're just not that old.
Yeah, and even if you look at the history of Bordeaux, which is an interesting comparison, all those boundaries have changed for the property ownership. They've all changed in the top estates, and this is just from this site, and they're just year in, year out working it. And yeah, and I think the vineyard practice there are great. Pru's been doing a lot of work towards they've dry farm now. They have been for years. They're using some straw mulch to for moisture and a few other things, and also weed prevention. But yeah, dry farmed. I believe they're using biodynamic. I think she's certified as biodynamic, but that's where she's heading, and she's just done a lot of work. And it's like an absolute pleasure. To drink. There's a part of me, just a small part of me, feels guilty because we're tasting it and no one else is. But I'll get over it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. There will be, by the way, I did record a video tasting note of this that we're going to post up on Winebow YouTube along with the rest of the wines as soon as possible. So you can find those, share them with your clientele, share them with yourselves. Maybe it'll motivate the sample pull. Maybe it'll motivate the extra interest in the buy. And I will mention that in an interview with Johan, who's making the wines now for the family, his when I said, how are you being innovative? He said, well, by not doing anything. He said, we're innovating in the vineyard by going backwards in time. And I'm like, oh, I love it. That's great. So to your point about their care and attention to detail, because the question was, how can you innovate and honor 160 plus years of tradition, right? So it was a great answer. And
it was a really good answer.
I know that everybody has dedicated more time than they expected, but hopefully they found this information worth it. I want to thank you, Mark.
I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but it's an absolute pleasure to run through this. And yeah, and I guess the bottom line is it's a bit hard to sort of sit there and there's a couple of guys tasting wine and talking to us about it, but hopefully there was some nuggets of information there that would be helpful in you guys sort of understanding. And also, but I think if nothing else, the thing to take away that I take away now with the adjustment in your portfolio is that, wow, if you want to put together a Shiraz tasting that speaks to all the great things about sort of regionality, individuality, quality and heritage and all the things that make wine great, you've got it here in a nutshell. And I don't think I'm normally picking from different portfolios to pull together a tasting like this, but that's not what we had to do here today. It's all here for you guys. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. If you have specific questions, you can either email me, ron.edwards@winebow.com, and I will forward them to Mark Davidson. If you know how to reach Mark Davidson, you can reach out to him directly.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good to see you, Ron.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.